Well, Robyn, Stephanie, here we are. We're coming right up on the Women Who Build Summit, and it's getting really exciting. And the two of you are going to be doing a pre-session workshop on Wednesday together, talking about mitigating disputes and disruptions through contracts, really from the beginning to the end. So before we get super into it, why don't we take some time and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with Robyn.
Thanks so much, Laura. We're so happy to be here. I am Robyn Blumberg. I am an associate in the construction infrastructure group at Castles, Brock and Blackwell LLP in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So we're joining you from the Great North. I am a construction litigator, so focus about 90% of my practice on disputes that arise either mid-project or at the end of a project. And while I do some front-end work, that really is the specialty of Miss Garraway, who will introduce herself in a second. But we're so excited to be here.
Thank you, Robyn. I'm excited too. Okay, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie, or Steph Garraway, and I'm also a senior associate at Castles, Brock and Blackwell. Some people might call me Robyn's sidekick. I do mainly the front end of construction work, and I work in the construction infrastructure space. So what that really means, as Robyn alluded to, is that I deal with the front end documents relating to a construction project. Can be a local project, can be a project based in the US, could be a project based anywhere in the world. And we really deal with negotiation, preparation, and also dealing with project delivery models for all types of projects, from construction managers, contractors, subcontractors, anybody on the pyramid. We're here to help. So we're really here, really excited, and looking forward to the workshop coming up in a couple of weeks.
So your pre-session workshop, which is going to be on Wednesday, I like to emphasize that because, you know, those are special workshops that happen like the day before the main event. And there have been a couple of times when people were like, oh, I wanted to go to that thing and it was on the day before. So want to make sure everybody knows, like, you guys are doing a Wednesday session. Your session is called Tips for Mitigating Disputes and Disruptions Through Contracts. And I think it's going to be really awesome that between the two of you, you're able to cover the whole life cycle of a contract, from the negotiation phase to the closeout phase. And I love how this is described and organized, because the idea that, you know, identifying 5 issues that you anticipate will continue to affect construction projects during 2023 and beyond. And this is a really kind of unprecedented time, because of now we're starting to see those disputes that everyone was kind of forecasting was going to happen at the beginning of COVID. And now they're starting to mature and really become real. And so I think things that we didn't really pay attention to, one of my favorite ones is, you know, force majeure. We didn't even train people on what that word meant, because it was so infrequent, unless you were in, you know, like a hurricane zone or something like that, or it was always weather, right? Force majeure was always weather. We never really considered that a pandemic would fall into that. And for some it did, and for some it didn't. It all depended on who was doing the talking at the time. But it's such a new era in construction contracts. So tell me a little bit about, you know, what kinds of questions you're hoping that you get, and what you're looking forward to in this session.
Well, I really think one thing I want to stress, I think you hit on a couple of really good points there, Laura. I think we are entering a new era in construction, but it's important to also realize in those couple of topics that we're going to cover, and there may be an extra bonus or 2, so maybe more than 5. What we're really seeing is kind of a resurgence of some of the same types of issues that the industry faces. It's just that we have intervening events that are causing these effects for people to become a little bit more creative with how they manage and how they deal with traditional construction-based relationships. So we still have a little bit of what I'll call the traditional model or traditional sense of issues, but we're also intermingling that with exactly what you're saying, facing new types of events on the ground that we have to deal with, and find creative ways to manage both sides of the spectrum. So from an owner's perspective, from a contractor or subcontractor's perspective, and try our best to find a commercially balanced area to be able to mitigate or kind of navigate through those disputes. So I think from my perspective, a couple of things I'm interested in hearing is how people have been dealing with those events from the get-go, and how they've now transformed and what they're doing to kind of mitigate against that from the start. Because we would have seen something like COVID, for example, kind of just hit hard and fast, and people just had to deal with it based on whatever they had within the four corners of their contract, or whatever they had available to them that a creative lawyer or advisor could really help them kind of get past. And we had governments taking various positions. In Canada, every province had a different position with respect to COVID and how it impacted projects, and similar in the US and across the world. And every country's reaction to that event impacted projects locally, at least in Canada. So we had working within the four corners. And from that experience, some parties have become very risk adverse, and some have come to realize that there needs to be a little bit more balance in how we contract and how we deal with our relationships, whether it's within how we draft the four corners of that agreement, or how we even structure our project from the beginning, talking more about collaborative contracting models versus traditional owner, contractor, subcontractor relationships. So kind of hearing where people stand on that spectrum, and kind of learning a little bit more about some of those issues and some of those interesting problems that have arisen during the life of a project is something I'm really interested to hear about, and kind of help people navigate through our workshop.
You're going to get questions, and it's going to be interesting, guarantee. So Robyn, what are you looking forward to getting like hammered on? Like, what kinds of questions are you hoping that you get to answer?
Yeah, of course. I'm really hoping that it's, instead of, just peppering us with questions, I really hope it's a workshop where we can really learn from each other. I think we'll have a mix of people in that room, whether they're lawyers, whether they're project managers. And so we can build and borrow from each other's experiences. And the number of times we have a client file come in, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll say to Steph, the next time you're dealing with this issue, we might need to consider X, Y, Z, because we're constantly learning and we're constantly developing just based on how issues are unfolding in this post-COVID era. And the issues that we're going to focus on are not solely COVID related. We have some other ones in there which we can chat about, but I think I'm hoping to learn from the people that join our workshop, as well as lend some of the expertise that we've garnered over the past couple of years, and how we're seeing disputes creatively be addressed through the contract beginnings. So the whole goal is we obviously never want to get to the dispute stage, right? It's a reality though, and we know that it happens more often than not. And so I think the goal would be, from everything we've learned to date, what can we do to best protect our clients so that they don't go through the unnecessary challenges that some of our other clients have faced. So we're borrowing, and then we're hoping to also borrow from the people in the seminar, see what their learned experiences are, and we're going to really do a brainstorm session. So we're going to lend it to the audience. We're going to say, have you faced this issue, and how have you dealt with it? And then we'll provide that feedback about how we would have dealt with it.
That's great. I'm really excited for this session, and I think there's going to be a lot for everyone to learn and discover together.
Yeah.
One of the demographics that I have the most affinity for are the people in the field, like the project managers and the superintendents. And, every time I would facilitate a project kickoff, we had that contract we had many times a contract summary letter that would outline the key terms and conditions that applied to that project team, so that they weren't like reading a massive chunk of contract when they just really needed to know a few terms. That's actually not very common to provide just a contract summary letter to the project team. So oftentimes they get thrown the contract, or it's in a filing cabinet somewhere, or virtually, or for real, and you're just told, hey, go read your contract, especially when you get into scope creep or other things, and the very first question is, well, did you read the contract? Well, no, I didn't read the contract. And I think that sometimes that happens because it's scary. So not only are we busy, right, and there's a lot of specs and a lot of drawings and a big contract to read on a job, but I think when you're sitting down, contracts are scary if you're not familiar with them, and it gets all legalese and do something else. It's too hard. So, which is not the right way to do it, but I think that that's a pretty common attitude towards it. So in your opinion, to help the actual project teams be more successful managing that contract, what would be like your one or two real pieces of advice? Not go read the contract. Like, that's not a piece of advice. What do you think?
Well, I mean, my first thing was going to say go read the contract, but I won't say that as my official piece of advice because I completely can understand and sympathize that, while I don't necessarily draft this way, and I don't think Robyn does either as younger lawyers, is that I do traditionally tend to stay away from the legalese because I know the end user is not going to be a lawyer. The end user is going to be a project manager. They're going to be even people further down the line in the construction chain who have to rely on that. And so they need to also understand it. Yes, there are provisions in the contract that are even scary to people who've been practicing for years upon years. Indemnities is one, like who even knows what that means? But that's for the lawyers to deal with. And when push comes to really shove, that's the kind of stuff we interpret. But basic stuff, a really good one, and Robyn would know this from the dispute side, changes. Everybody should know how to deal with changes and what procedure you need to take. So I do think that having something like a summary letter is a really good way to kind of boil down to the meat and potatoes of your contract for the people who are using like the day-to-day mechanisms of it, to understand what they need to do every single day to make sure they're kind of following what everyone has agreed upon. But I think one of the bigger tips is that when we do draft these contracts, one, we try to keep them to the points that we understand are the most important to the parties. And two, like from our perspective, we also do seminars, because a lot of companies, in particular owners and developers, will use the same template for multiple jobs. So the owners always know from their perspective what level of risk they're willing to enter into. Now, hey, if the project has a unique aspect, those templates may change, but having that template, making sure that your key PMs are very aware of it and educating them on those key topics that would naturally fall within a summary letter is something that I think is important. And when you do those updates and kind of have, I would say, contract huddles is something that I think is important, because as an organization, whether you're an owner or a contractor or sub, having those huddles, learning from your mistakes that happen on the ground will help you constantly re-educate yourself about that contract and about how to carry on the next job and the next job, because there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be people who don't follow notice periods. It's another big topic for Robyn to talk about, but these are just things like kind of like if you practice them and you know that that's kind of the stance that the company is going to take, you kind of constantly re-educate yourself, but sharing and communicating about those things are important. So yes, I will say reading the contract is important, but boiling down to those key things that you're going to practice day to day, I think is critical. The other point is just to remember that if you hit a bump in the road, to stop, breathe, consider what you're going to do before you react, because just reacting may be outside of the contract, and that's where problems start to happen. So not everything has to happen in an immediate pace. taking a step back and unfortunately referring to the contract or asking somebody who might know, right? May help you kind of bypass having to read that
On
massive
the topic
step.
of change
I
management
love that.
and focusing on that at the beginning, like Steph was talking about, Robyn, your universe is kind of more at the end where there are disputes and then potentially litigation if the dispute can't be resolved.
Yeah.
What do you see as a couple of real fails that happen all the time in regards to change management that if people just kind of had a little bit higher awareness, they might be able to avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to clarify, I think while there is this perception that disputes often arise at the end of a project, I would say 50% of my practice is dealing with disputes as they arise on the project. So a client will contact us, something has gone wrong in the context of a change, perhaps there's a dispute over change order terms, and they'll call us mid-project dispute so that this isn't just left until the end. Unfortunately, we do sometimes see, things are left until it is too late. And so I guess to answer your question, Laura, two considerations in the change context. The first is notice, and I know Steph spoke about this briefly, but Canadian courts, and again, we're coming at this from a Canadian perspective, but I really do think this can be borrowed in the greater context, obviously, for US participants coming to this seminar. But Canadian courts have found that notice provisions are not mere technicalities to be ignored. And that's very, very important, because I think that when there is a change process, and further to what Steph had mentioned about that kind of overview document, those notice provisions are something that need to be highlighted on that overview document. And that's because if there are changes that are occurring, there are often timelines associated with those changes, and those cannot be ignored. And I think so often we see that someone's coming at an issue and they've missed that notice period, and then that is something that can be used against them to deny that change. So I think the fact that there's a notice provision is so often seen as just, oh, it's something we should abide by, but in Canada at least, notice provisions have actually been used to reject a claim altogether. So they do have quite a bit of a significance. The other area I want to comment on, and we see tons of delay claims, tons. And one issue that we see in kind of the change management process is the use of the TBD or the NA. So when there is a question about how many days a change is going to affect the project length by, there's a TBD or an NA inserted in place of a number of days. Or when there's a cost that should be associated with the change, the parties don't want to deal with it at the time, and so they insert TBD or NA. That has huge implications later on, because if a party has inserted a TBD or an NA, that can often be used either against them or for them, depending on who you're acting for. We most often act for owners, but I won't speak specifically, but it's just something to be considered, because the idea behind a change order is that it's an agreement between the parties as to what is the time and the cost for that change. And so when you insert these blanket opportunities to negotiate further, that's not the intention of the change order. And so to the extent that the parties can identify those issues at the time of the change, I think that's something to be considered. And we'll talk about that a bit more in our seminar. I think what I'm excited most about for this workshop is the fact that Steph and I are lawyers. We sit behind the screen. And so often when a client comes to us with an issue, I go to the contract, I look to the provisions, but I'm not the one on the ground. And I can't anticipate what those issues are going to be every day, and I can't react because I'm not, the person making the decisions on the ground. And so I think borrowing back to what I was saying previously about really borrowing that expertise from the people who have been on the ground, like you, Laura. You said that you really had the gambit of experience, from being on the ground to where you are now. And I think that's kind of the lesson that we as lawyers need to learn from our PMs and from those who are doing the work, whether in a management capacity or even I just taught a class recently, and I was learning from the foreman, right? He was teaching me about workplace safety issues that he had experienced at work. And so it's really about what is it like to be on the ground? Because as much as we can say and tell you need to read the contract, we can't appreciate what it's like day to day. And so I think that's why the workshop will be a really cool opportunity for the lawyers and those on the ground to engage with each other.
This is great. I think the issues with contracts and adhering to a contract and what are contract documents, what are not, and precedence of documents and all of that stuff is just such a mystery to so many people. So, and I think that it's such a wide and deep conversation that even if you've been exposed to it before, there's always something new to learn. And there's always like a new insight to get, because it's not something that, if you're not in that world, in that part of the construction industry or the AEC industry, it's just not something you're familiar with. And things change. Things change all the time. So this is one of those topics that just continual learning is so important. So I'm really excited for everyone to attend your workshop, and I think it's going to be awesome. Thank you guys so much for taking time and helping us talk about it first. It's nice to get a preview.
Yeah, we're really excited, Laura. And coming from, as Robyn mentioned, the Great White North, we also do a lot of projects in the US. So we're excited to share and to bounce off, some of our ideas and experience in the industry, and to really hear from people about what they're going through and how we can provide, I wouldn't say advice, but to provide a little bit more insight into how some of that stuff can be mitigated, and really to get into the nitty gritty of what we both absolutely love to do and are excited to share with like-minded people.
Everything that Steph said, I think it's going to be a great opportunity also to meet other women in the industry. When I started my practice, I was the only woman in my group, female in my group, and now I've been joined by a few others, including Steph. And so it really is an important opportunity to just meet with other people in the industry, but other women in the construction industry. And I think it's going to give us the opportunity to just to build connections and learn from each other.
And the last thing I'd add to Robyn is we look forward to really difficult and hard questions. So yeah, whoever's attending this kick-ass seminar better bring it, because we're ready.
Well done. Well done. They'll answer that call. I promise you.
Uh-oh.
Yep. Excellent.
Okay.